The long mahogany conference table gleamed under the glow of the chandelier, casting reflections of tension across the room. The air was heavy with anticipation as members of the Lancaster family, wealthy, polished, and emotionally distant, sat upright in their chairs, waiting for the final words of their late patriarch to be revealed. Henry Lancaster had been a real estate titan in New York City for over 5 decades. He built an empire of buildings, hotels, and investments that spanned the country. But beyond his business success, he had earned a reputation for being cold, calculated, and private. So it was no surprise that his will reading had attracted nearly every living relative, some of whom hadn't spoken to him in years, some never at all. Near the end of the long table sat a young woman in her 20s, dressed plainly in a thrift store blouse and worn shoes. Her name was Emily Lancaster. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands resting tensely on her lap. She didn't belong to this world of diamonds, tailored suits, and champagne smiles. Her father, Henry's estranged son, had died of cancer when she was just a child. Since then, Emily had lived with her mother in a modest apartment in Queens, far away from the Lancaster mansions and luxury cars. A few of the older cousins leaned toward each other, whispering and smirking as they glanced in Emily's direction. "What is she doing here?" one of them muttered under her breath. "I didn't even know she still had the Lancaster name," said another. "She probably thinks she's getting a house or something." The remarks weren't quiet enough. Emily heard them all. Her cheeks flushed, but she kept her eyes down. She wasn't here to fight for money. She didn't even expect to be mentioned in the will. She was here out of respect for the few kind moments she had shared with her grandfather in her teenage years. He used to visit her once every few months after her father died. He never brought gifts, just stories, and sometimes they would sit in the park and feed birds. It was the only connection she had left to a family name that otherwise ignored her existence. The door opened and the room grew still. A tall man with silver hair and sharp features entered, holding a thick brown envelope. Mr. Whitmore, Henry's longtime attorney, walked to the head of the table and placed the envelope down with care. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the room. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he said with a neutral tone. "Mr. Henry Lancaster's last will and testament is legally binding and has been reviewed in accordance with New York state law. I will now begin reading its contents exactly as written and signed by Mr. Lancaster himself." Everyone straightened in their seats. The next 45 minutes felt like a parade of dollar signs and entitlement. Mr. Whitmore read, line by line, as mansions were assigned to sons, hedge funds to granddaughters, summer homes to nephews, jewelry, rare cars, private art collections, all spoken for. There were polite nods, exchanged glances, some barely concealed grins. Emily remained still. Her name hadn't been mentioned once. Then came the final page. Mr. Whitmore's tone shifted slightly. He paused, then read, "And to my granddaughter, Emily Lancaster." There was a laugh. A few people turned their heads. A cousin whispered, "Here comes the Starbucks gift card." But then something unusual happened. Mr. Whitmore stopped reading. He slowly closed the will, then took off his glasses and looked directly at Emily. The room went silent. The lawyer stood. Everyone's eyes followed him. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "I was instructed to pause here and address the room directly before reading the final clause. Henry Lancaster requested that I deliver this next portion standing, as he believed it deserved your full attention." A wave of confusion passed through the room. Emily's pulse quickened. Her hands were trembling now. She wasn't sure what was coming, but suddenly, everyone who had ignored her laughed at her, or pretended she wasn't even family, was looking straight at her. And then the lawyer spoke again. What he said next would change everything. Mr. Whitmore took a slow breath and looked around the room. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension. Henry Lancaster left strict instructions for how this portion of his will was to be delivered. And I quote, "This part will surprise many. Let them be surprised." He picked up the final page and began to read aloud. "To my granddaughter, Emily Lancaster, I leave all my remaining personal assets, including the Westchester estate, my private art collection, the antique car garage, and my entire 51% ownership in Lancaster Enterprises. I appoint her the sole executive controller of the Lancaster Family Trust and grant her full voting rights on all business holdings and properties. For a moment, no one reacted. The words didn't seem real. Then came the gasps. Someone knocked over a glass. A cousin choked on their drink. Emily sat frozen, blinking, her mouth slightly open. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. "Did he really just say?" Mr. Whitmore continued, his voice unwavering. "In my final months, I came to a painful conclusion. The family I built my empire for lost sight of its values. I watched my children fight over vacations and money. I listened to them argue over gifts and power. None of them asked how I felt or what I needed, except Emily. She asked if I was lonely. She remembered my birthday. She told me about her life, her dreams, and she never asked for a thing. I saw in her a heart I feared no longer existed in this family." The room erupted. One of the older sons stood up, furious. "This is a mistake. He must have been sick, delirious." "Forgery!" a niece shouted. "No way he'd give everything to her." Mr. Whitmore held up a hand. Everything was verified by 3 independent attorneys, per Henry's instructions. His signature was witnessed, recorded, and notarized. This document is airtight. Emily still hadn't spoken. Her fingers were trembling. She felt 100 eyes on her, some full of rage, others confusion, most disbelief. She slowly stood. Her knees were weak, her chest tight. "Why would he do this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The lawyer stepped toward her and handed her a sealed envelope. "This is a letter he left for you. He asked that you read it privately, when the time is right." She took it with both hands, staring at her name written in strong, shaky handwriting. She didn't open it, not yet. Her aunt hissed from across the room, "She's not even one of us. She didn't grow up in this family." Emily turned slowly. Her voice was calm but firm. "Maybe that's why he chose me." The room fell silent. Emily didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She wasn't the type. Her hands were still shaking and tears burned behind her eyes. This wasn't about revenge or money. It was about being seen. For the first time in her life. For once, she wasn't invisible. 2 days later, she walked through the glass doors of Lancaster Enterprises, wearing the same simple clothes. The board of directors tried to push back, but the legal documents were clear. She was in charge now. Instead of issuing threats or dismissals, Emily asked to speak to every department personally. She visited employees, janitors, receptionists, people the family had ignored for years. She asked questions. She listened. She didn't fire anyone. She created a wellness fund for staff families. She donated to housing programs in her father's name. She launched scholarships for children of single parents. And she did it all quietly, the way her grandfather had once sat quietly beside her in that little park, feeding birds and telling stories. Her relatives tried to sue. They tried to turn the press against her, but nothing stuck. Her grandfather had prepared for all of it. The letter she received, she opened it 1 week later, sitting on the back porch of the Westchester estate. It read, "Emily, I built towers, but I lost touch with people. I let ambition silence my heart. You reminded me what kindness looks like. I hope you'll build something better, with less concrete and more compassion. Everything I have is yours now, not because of your blood, but because of your spirit. Love." Grandpa. She cried that night, not because she was rich, not because she'd won, but because she finally knew she'd mattered. And all those who had once laughed at her, now they watched from the sidelines, silenced, not by power, but by the quiet strength of the girl they had never truly seen.